Welcome to the Girlfriend Book Club's monthly discussion. I'm Shelley Emling, the editor of the Girlfriend newsletter. I'm also the moderator of the Girlfriend Book Club. After a very lengthy voting process, the 50,000 members of the Girlfriend Book Club chose Remarkably Bright Creatures as our book pick for October. And I'm so glad they did. What an unusual and amazing read. And so tonight we're so thrilled to be joined by the author of Remarkably Bright Creatures, Shelby Van Pelt. So welcome, Shelby.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you with us. What an unusual book, I have to say. I love when a book really is so original that it catches me off guard. I love it. So well done. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I get a lot of people who are like, I'm not normally into things, never normally be into a book with an octopus narrator, but then they try it and they like it. So.
Yeah. So first of all, I know you get this you're asked this all the time, but I have to ask it because our members want to know as well. I mean, what was the impetus behind this idea? Like, how did you come up with this idea to do a book kind of from a viewpoint of the octopus and everything else that went into it?
I mean, it really started with just this character sketch that I did after watching a YouTube video of a giant Pacific octopus that was at the Seattle Aquarium. I don't remember the octopus's name or if they shared what his name was, but he was in this tank that was kind of a big cylinder that was right in the middle of this busy aquarium during the day. And this octopus just decided it was time to go. So he was trying to go up over the edge, and the people were surrounding the tank, were pushing his arms back in.
Wow.
And yeah, I had just started writing fiction at the time, or really like dabbling in it. Like, I didn't even really have a lot of goals at that time other than just, this is something I've always liked to do. So I'm going to putz around with it a little bit. But I just thought that would make a really, really fun character. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would have a book that was centered around that a few years later. But yeah, really, it's an internet origin story, I suppose, appropriate for our age these days.
Well, I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you now. I mean, what's your background? Did you want to be a writer from when you were a little kid, or how did this happen?
I always loved writing. I was really more into like journalism. I was editor of my high school paper, that sort of thing. And I graduated college and went into sort of a standard office job. And my job involved a lot of spreadsheets and data analysis, which is, I could do it okay, but it wasn't necessarily my strong suit. But I found that I really enjoyed like writing the narrative reports that would go along with these analyses that we did. So after a few years sort of after I left that job, my husband and I had moved a few times. We had decided we were going to start a family. And so I kind of stepped back from that job that was very data heavy and thought, well, maybe I'll just, we were living in Atlanta at the time. We had just moved there. And I thought maybe I'll just take a creative writing class. It was at Emory University. It was through their adult education program. So not any kind of credit thing or thing you had to apply for, just sort of one of these community-based enrichment classes. And yeah, the Marcellus character really came out of a writing exercise from that class. So, I never thought of myself as particularly creative, and I still have a hard time thinking of myself that way, even though I've written this book that, has a fairly unusual setup and set of characters. But yeah, writing has always been something that I've loved, and reading was always something that I really loved. So for me to be a part of that world just feels really great.
Yeah. So I know that Tova, the character in the book, I've read countless times, that was loosely based on your grandmother. But I'm wondering, looking at all the characters, Cameron, I mean, everybody, was there a particular character that was difficult to write, or a chapter that was difficult to write, or a scenario that was difficult to write? I'm just curious if there was something that really was harder than the rest of it, maybe.
Okay, well, I will say the hardest thing about the whole book was getting like the timeline right. I will never again write a book that has like day whatever
right,
just marked out in such clear terms in the book, because what would happen, and I think my editor must have been fed up with me by the end of this process, we would shift stuff around and move stuff around, and then it had this timeline that would just get thrown off by a day or a week, or if something would get reversed. And I'm not like a super detailed sort of person. So that was very difficult for me. The details of that were hard to get my arms around. In terms of characters, I think the character that was hardest for me to pin down was probably Cameron.
Oh, okay.
He is the one who went through multiple iterations of being a much younger man. You know, at one point I had him as being more of like a kid or a teenager. And I wrote quite a bit of the book with him being a teenager before I realized that, you know, he's very immature and he has a lot of growing up to do. And I kind of needed that to be a character flaw.
Right.
And when you have a character who's a teenager, that's not a character flaw. That's just a part of being a teenager.
Yeah.
So I had this kind of dawning moment. I remember talking with my critique partner and being like, oh, he needs to be like 30, like an immature 30. And so then I had to go back and rewrite a bunch of the, you know, stuff leading up to that and make it all fit together. But
well,
yeah,
I was actually going to ask you about him later on, because he was one of the characters that I think, you know, we're rooting for him from day one, you know? And so I wondered if he was based on somebody you knew or what, because it's kind of difficult to write as a woman, writing about a 30-year-old man that's like trying to grow up, I would think.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. So it's really strange to me that this book doesn't have, like, it doesn't really have me in it, right? Like, it's, you know, I'm 42 with young kids, and there's no 40-something-year-old woman in this book, and there's no young kids.
Right.
I think deliberately I was trying to, you know, avoid falling into some sort of trap, real or imagined, of, oh, I'm going to start writing this, and then I'm going to be unable to resist the temptation to write it about myself. For some reason, I felt the need to really push myself into other roles that were very unlike me.
Right.
That said, I think Cameron, if he's inspired by anyone, he has two sources of inspiration. And the first is me, probably from when I was younger. Just, you know, that, like, you know, you don't want to look at your ATM balance because you know it's going to be close to red. And you just are living life kind of on this track where you know that you're a step away from, you know, kind of falling into the pit or something. Well, and just being afraid to succeed, you know, to have opportunities, but then be afraid to take them and, like, you know, sink them almost purposely because it's scary.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot of Cameron came from just, I feel like everyone has known a Cameron, like everyone has had that friend or that relative or that partner that they don't see their own potential, and you just kind of want to, like, shake them and give them a wake up call. And, you know, he's a 30-year-old dude. Like, they're kind of frustrating people sometimes, but
no, I just loved his relationship with his friends. I thought it was great. I mean, you know, we're rooting for him every step of the way, which I thought was really phenomenal.
Well, and I think 30 is an age often where where people start to kind of bifurcate. You have the people that have, you know, relationships and children and are kind of on the
track,
you know, the track, and then you have people who are not on that track. And not that either way is right or wrong, but I feel like for me, 30 was around the age where that started to kind of really show.
Yeah. So I don't know how long, I mean, I've looked at some of your previous interviews. I still don't know how long it took you to write this book. So I'm curious about that. And just what your writing process was like when you were writing this. Did you get up every morning at a certain time and write for 4 hours straight? Or, you know, how long did it take you to write the book, and what was the writing process like?
I would say it took both several years and also like several months, depending on how you kind of define it.
Yeah.
I started it years and years ago, like mid 20 teens, you know, really with this writing class and this sort of character sketch. And then I was like, oh, maybe people really liked it in the class. My teacher really liked it and invited me to, like, join this other workshop, which I thought, like, oh, I've made it now, you know, like, I'm in this critique group. I'm a real writer. But for many years, I just kind of played around with, like, the first 2 or 3 chapters. I couldn't really get past wanting those chapters to be perfect. Right. And so I would go to these critique groups, and every session I would just bring an edited version of the thing I'd brought the week before, just, you know, kind of going over it again and again, trying to get it exactly right. And obviously you can't do that if you ever want to finish a book. At some point you have to just move past it. So I did that on and off for a few years, and it was around 2019 that I got it into my head, really after reading Soul of an Octopus. I don't know if you've heard of this book.
Yeah, well, I saw. Yeah, yes, I do.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's by Cy Montgomery. It's nonfiction. I think if readers have liked Remarkably Bright Creatures, they will also like Soul of an Octopus if they haven't read it yet. Like I said, it's nonfiction, but it's a very, very fun read about this science journalist that goes and shadows aquarium workers who keep captive octopuses. But I read that and thought, oh gosh, like this is so like mirrors what I was trying to do with this book. I should really pick it back up again and start. And once I did that, I want to say it was maybe about 9 months. When I really was like, okay, I'm going to focus, I'm going to get it done. Yeah. I had a pact with my critique partner who was kind of in the same boat in terms of having this manuscript that had aged years and years at this point and not like a fine wine. And really wanting to just get something done. So we would trade pages every week. We would have these phone calls, and we really kept each other on track, especially, a couple months into this, it was when COVID hit. Yeah. So it was like, I'm so glad that I had her and had that accountability. Otherwise I probably would have just, rolled over and said, well, the world has closed and my kids are home all the time and let's just forget it.
Well, I was going to ask you about, I know that when you found your agent, you've been interviewed several times, and you said that the agent's reader, assistant, whatever you want to call them, said this is either bananas or brilliant, and before they sent it on to the agent. But I'm also curious about just the kind of, I also read that you did a lot of research for this book, like you went to an aquarium and you actually like were in front of an octopus. So did that happen before you found the agent, or was that after you got the deal? And I'm curious as how that all worked.
Yeah, so it kind of shook out in a less than ideal fashion due to COVID mainly. So a lot of the time that I spent just in sort of octopus observation mode was very early on when I was still in that sort of, I'm rewriting these first couple chapters. I'm figuring out the characters. I remember my daughter was a baby and we were living in Atlanta, and we got a membership to the Georgia Aquarium. And the woman who signed us up for the memberships was like, oh, your daughter's going to love it here. I'm like, my daughter is asleep in the stroller. Like, I'm going to go hang out with your octopus. Yeah, and she would be in the stroller, or I had her in the little carrier, and I would just, bounce her so she would keep sleeping while I sat there and paced and like waited for the octopus to come out. And, once I sort of picked back up with it in 2019, this was like the end of 2019, and thought, okay, I'm going to really do this. I thought, oh, I'm going to email the Shed Aquarium, because we were living in Chicago by that time. And I'm going to do all these things and meet an octopus and do my research. And then COVID hit. So it was like, well, I guess I'm relying on the internet. Yeah. And fortunately, there's a lot of great octopus information on the internet. So it ended up being not too bad. But and I did get a chance to meet an octopus later, after the book had been sent out. But
okay. And then you sent it to the agent, and the agent did have somebody say it's either bananas or brilliant, right?
Yes. That was her assistant, Maria, who I feel like is going to be immortalized for this comment.
Well, it's a great comment. I'm sorry. Okay. And so I asked you about I want to get something from our book club members.
Yeah.
Also, they were asking, are you now obsessed with the Pacific octopus and marine life in general? And, are you, I don't know, have you always been obsessed with marine life, or just now you're starting to really become more obsessed with it, or what?
I've always liked kind of weird creatures. So, as a kid, we always had cats in my house. We were a cat house, but I also had like a bedroom full of lizards and reptiles and geckos and, things that ate crickets. And, I had fish when I was little, but I was never like a big fish tank girl. I think mostly because I don't think my mom allowed it. She was just like, yeah, no, we're not doing aquariums. We'll do, you can have the terrarium with the lizards, but no fish. But yes, I think that, the interest was definitely sparked when back in the 20 teens when I came up with the idea for the book. And I think since then, it's just such a special time for octopuses right now.
It is.
Right now being, maybe the last 2-3 years, and hopefully going forward it keeps going. But I feel like every month or two there's another article that comes out that's just uncovering something amazing about cephalopods or octopuses specifically. And I've had a few more octopus encounters since then, and every time I just leave more and more kind of like, sucked into the magic of what they are and how weird and wonderful they are.
So is there anything you could tell us that surprised you about them? I mean, when we go to an aquarium now, if we see an octopus in there, is there something we should be looking at? Is there something that's really startling about them that we probably wouldn't know?
Well, they change colors and textures according to their moods, which, I mean, most people probably know that, but I feel like you have to spend a little bit of time in front of the exhibit to really get the range of their moods. And that, that can be tough if you're at an aquarium on a busy Saturday, and you don't want to be that person who's just like, I'm here in front of the glass, like no one else.
Nobody's coming near me. Yeah.
But if you happen to be when it's less busy and you can take the time to do that, I think it really is worth doing, because they just have such, they wear their emotions on their skin, I think, in a really cool way. I'm also convinced that they can hear and they must be able to understand at least some of what we say, or tones or something, because I have talked to octopuses and have them, I've had them respond to my voice.
Really?
At least, the tone of voice. So again, you're like, you may look a little crazy standing outside of an aquarium tank talking to an octopus, but
well,
they're just.
Yeah, staying on this theme. So some people were asking, why didn't Marcellus just leave the aquarium?
So here's the thing about Marcellus. He is the only first person narrator in the book, right? So he's the only one who's telling you I, me, whatever. You're getting his character through his point of view.
Right.
And I think one of the really fun things about first person point of view is that even if a character is very self-aware and self-reflective, you're never going to get the full picture of who they are, because it's always filtered through them. And so one thing about Marcellus that, I think the fact that this question comes up kind of speaks to it, is that he's scared. I mean, he's kind of all bluster in his little journal entries of, well, I'm so smart and I can do this, this, and that. But why doesn't he leave? I think he's afraid of change. And in that way, he shares that with the other characters in the book, which was very intentional. So, it's alluded to a little bit. There's a scene in the book where he is, kind of, I think Cameron is actually the one who kind of stops him. He's standing at the door thinking, I'm going to go, but he doesn't go. I think it almost is like a human feature of Marcellus that he has this, aversion to change and this fear of the unknown. Or this fear of taking a big risk. So, I think he could have left if he wanted to. And, but then we wouldn't have had a story. So,
so this is one of the most beautiful covers of a book, and everybody says so. I don't know how much of a hand you had in this cover, but I was curious about any other books that you really admire the cover of that you can share with us. Because it's really a stunning cover.
Well, so I have a lot of friends who I have friends who have self-published and friends who have traditionally published. And I feel like one of the things that is always discussed among those two groups is when you publish traditionally, you're going to give up control of things like your cover. And I was almost sort of like steeling myself for a fight about it. Just like I'd heard stories of people who were like, oh, they wanted to do this and that, and I hated it. But like, it says right there in the contract at the end of the day, it's their decision how to do the cover. And so when I got the proof of the mock-up of it, the first draft of it, so to speak, and it was this original watercolor that the artist at Echo had done. Her name is Vivian Elrow. She does amazing, amazing work. She's on Instagram. But I was just like, my jaw dropped. I'm like, I have no complaints. Like this is perfect. Like no, I think we tweaked a little bit of the colors on some of the like kelp, but really that was it. It was just like kind of perfect from the get-go.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
I feel like there's been a big trend in the last few years in very abstract book covers. And I like those because they're very striking. I always love a book that just grabs my eye from across from across the library, the bookstore, whatever. But I feel like it's maybe turning a little bit back now more toward having real people and real shapes and objects presented on cover art instead of just kind of, the pretty colors and, striking designs.
So
which I think is cool.
Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. So you set the book in Washington State. So have you lived in Washington State? Was this some sort of nod to Washington State? Was there?
Yeah, it's definitely a nod. I grew up there, so that I'm from Tacoma, Washington. I have a ton of family who still lives there, and I always knew that I wanted to set it there. I think just by default, almost, for a couple of reasons. One, because I really liked the idea of having this creature just steps away from its native habitat, but captive.
Right.
And there really wouldn't be that many other places where you could do something like that. It would have to be along the Pacific coast. And, also I've moved around a lot as an adult, and, like Washington State just really still feels like home for me.
Yeah.
And it really just felt like the only place that I could credibly write a story, and really felt that I knew the culture and the geography and the setting intimately enough to write a story there. And, it was really nice because I was writing so much of it during COVID and we couldn't go home.
Yeah.
We like canceled a trip in March 2020 to go back there. And it was just like, well, at least I have got my book.
So the mystery of Tova's son, be missing, was that difficult to write, or was that always part of this book from the very beginning? You always wanted some sort of mystery in the background? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think really one of the very, very first versions. And again, this was just like a couple chapters that I wrote. I had it being like a murder mystery, which is funny because, I don't think I'm equipped to write a murder mystery. So, obviously it evolved into being something a little bit more, not quite so front and center in terms of the plot. But, I knew that there was going to be some sort of mystery. I knew that I wanted Tova to have this hole in her life. And it bounced around a little bit between was he just missing, did he die? Like, what was the details there? But I always knew that hole was going to be there for her. I think one of the things that from the start, I wanted Tova to be to have a difficult relationship with motherhood. Mm-hmm. And particularly as she is going into this sort of age of her life where, sometimes older adults become more dependent on their children.
Right.
And what happens when you don't have that? Like what is someone's relationship to sort of society when they find themselves in a situation where they don't have any living children or living family to take care of them? Like how do they make their own safety net? Like how does that work?
Well, I love Tova's relationship with her friends in that group, I mean, that really rang true for me. I don't know how you did that, but that was pretty amazing.
I will tell you how I did it. I lifted it out of my grandmother's life. Because she really did have a group of friends called the Knitwits who did not do any knitting that I could observe anyway from their meetings, and drank a lot of coffee and tea and just sat around and talked, and they met faithfully every week. And, I kind of remember as we lived next door to my grandma when I was growing up. So I just, was very close to her and just observed a lot of her daily life. And I remember seeing them, the group just became less and less over time. And, that dynamic of just sort of a shrinking,
right.
Shrinking generation.
I thought that was really powerful how each of, it was shrinking and shrinking, and they didn't want Tova to go, and then there'd only be two left or something. It was really kind of sad and poignant, and it was really good.
Well, and it's funny because you think of if you've got a long-time group of friends like that, what you're going to recruit more people to join? It's just, I mean, I guess you
the other people for 40 years, and come on.
It was an interesting dynamic for me to think about, having observed the real version of it and then being able to write a fictionalized version of it.
Right. So everybody wants to know, what are you working on now? Next?
I am working on a second book. It's pretty early in the process, so I don't have a lot to share about it, but it's not a sequel or anything like that, but it does have some of the same elements. There's a lot of family dynamics and sort of a Northwestern setting, although it's not Washington based. And there's a character who's not quite human, or a narrator who is maybe not quite human. So hopefully it ticks some of the same boxes. But, I think second novels are notoriously hard for authors, especially when your first book has a little bit of success. So it's like, just trying to get out of my own head to be able to write the words on the page and not constantly be thinking about like, oh, are people going to like this? Just basically remembering that like we write a first draft for a reason. It doesn't need to be perfect the first time.
Yeah. No, I have no doubt you're going to write a great second book. So what, also everybody wants to know, like, what authors inspire you? What's been your favorite book of the last couple of years? What are you reading?
Oh my gosh. Well, I just finished reading a book called Marrying the Ketchups by Jennifer Close, which was really fun. I was on
a bunch of people in the book club have been talking about that book.
Yeah, it's really funny. It's hilarious. I just shared a panel with her at the Southern Festival of Books this past weekend, and so I added everyone's book to my TBR list, which is like a mile long. I'm never going to get through it all, but yeah, it was just, I love the way that she just created these really really relatable, really real, and really funny characters. And it's the backdrop is a restaurant. So it's all of this like restaurant drama, which is just always kind of juicy and fun and like ripe for really great storytelling. So I loved that. I loved Jamie Ford's The Many Daughters of Afong Moy, which just came out.
Yeah.
Oh, it's really good. It's another one of these books that, and I've talked to Jamie about this, about how it's like, the book doesn't really fit in one genre because it has elements of historical fiction. It has elements of speculative fiction. It's very character driven, but it also like it moves fast. It's not like super meditative. It's got a great central plot that moves it along.
I'll have to read that. Okay.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, talking about like the classics, I think that John Irving will always and forever be one of my favorite authors. Jessamine Ward, who wrote Salvage the Bones, and what was her other one? Sing Unburied Sing. Another book that has like these ghost narrators where you're like, I'm not sure where this fits genre-wise. Like it's speculative, but it's literary, and it's just beautiful, basically. Not the easiest read, definitely a little bit of a darker subject matter, but I so admire the way that authors like that can just put together words that are almost like, poetry in prose form in their novels.
So finally, the girlfriend, the newsletter and the social channels, it's all about female friendship and the importance of female friendship as you age. So I'm just wondering what you like to do with your friends besides reading, writing, not that, but what do you like to do with your best friends?
Oh my gosh. Well, my best girlfriends live far away from me. And it's like a best friend who's actually the wife of one of my good friends from college, a couple good friends from college. And we get together every week and do like this beach week with all of our families. And we all have like the same age kids. And so our kids have kind of grown up doing this. But it's like a week that I look forward to every year because it's funny. We always pick these locations for this. And it's like, oh, well, if we go here, we could go hiking. Or if we go there, we could go like, we could go windsurfing or kayaking. And do we ever do any of those things? No. We do zero of those things. We sit around and we gab and we drink seltzers and
talk. Yeah.
And it's so restorative. And I'm so grateful that we've been able to maintain those friendships over, many people moving around different states and time zones and things like that. And friendship is so important, I think, when you get older, and it's really, really hard, I think, to make friends. And so I think things like book clubs are awesome. We have a neighborhood book club that just started back up again after COVID. And I so look forward to that because it's just like, it's a night when I don't have to be someone's mom. I don't have to, be worrying about dinner. Like I can just be a person in a room of people who like books. Like it's great.
Well, Shelby, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We so appreciate it. I mean, If you haven't, I think everybody in the book club's read it, but for the few that haven't, it's Remarkably Bright Creatures. Buy it for your friend for a Christmas present if they haven't read it. It's a fantastic read. Shelby, thank you so much. I couldn't be more thrilled than to talk to you tonight. For those in the book club, I just want a reminder that our book pick for November is Hidden Pictures, and the author will be joining us on November 15th, I believe, the week before Thanksgiving. So be sure to mark that on your calendar and stick around on the book club page, because we will be posting some conversation starters so that you guys could talk about all the great things that you loved about Remarkably Bright Creatures. So thank you so much, Shelby. Have a great evening and good luck. And we can't wait for your next book to come out.
Thank you so much.